morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the first part of a two-part presentation on family history. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Reese, and I'm the counselor / acting high commissioner / charge d'affaires at the Barbados High Commission in Ottawa. This morning's session will introduce us to the ABCs of how to trace family history. And for most of us, that has been taking quite a bit of recently. There's been a lot of discussions about this. There's a number of television programs looking into it. Some of them called Who Are You? Where Are You From? And I'm sure this morning we'll get a lot of information on how to go about finding this, this knowledge that we seek. This morning we have with us a panel of experts who will provide us with not only the knowledge but the technical know-how on how to go about tracing our family history. On my far left, on my right, is David Williams, Chief Archivist, and Ingrid Cumberbatch, Senior Archivist on my left. On her left is Kieran Powers, Archivist, and on her left is Frederick Alley, a historian and a PhD student. With us today is Sandra Taitt Eaddy, who will give a presentation, who will actually do the first presentation this morning on family history and tracing that. She's a genealogist and a historian. At this point, I will hand you over to our moderator and chairman, David Williams.
Thank you, Madam Acting High Commissioner. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome all of you here this morning to this family history research session. I'm very pleased and happy to see you all and to have you here with us. Certainly, we in the archives are happy to once again present this workshop in family history. This is our second time, and we hope that you find it enjoyable, edifying, instructive, educational. Now, since 1977, with the publication of Alice Haley's book, Roots, family history has received a great boost worldwide, particularly in the African diaspora. And we in Barbados are no exception. And certainly those of you who are part of the Barbadian diaspora, at the Archives Department, we have all the tools that are necessary to conduct one's family history, to trace one's roots, to use the commonly used term. We have records of baptisms, marriages, burials, dating back to the 17th century. We have wills, deeds, powers of attorney, but you'll hear more about the documents at the archives as we go on with this morning's session. So we want to introduce you to those tools, encourage you to use them, and equip you with the knowledge so to do. Without any further ado, therefore, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Mrs. Sandra Taitt Eaddy. I hope I'm correct referring to her as a Bajan American. Sometimes she says. She's a genealogist and a historian, and she will talk to you about family history research in general. So over to you, Sandra.
Good morning. I'm so happy to come down from up here. Okay, so good morning. Raise your hand if you were here the last time we did this. Okay, so you're looking for some new information today. I will help you with that. Okay, so many of you, it's your first time. Raise your hand if you attempted to do the activity on the screen. Raise your hand if you got all 8 great grades. great-great-grandparents. Okay, I figured as much. So today we are going to look at, well, first let me tell you a little bit about myself. I was born in St. Joseph. I was raised by my grandmother, so I have a lot of grandmother stories. And so my education started here, the first 12 years. The last 2 were at St. Michael's, where they taught us how to be obedient. Yeah. And then I moved to the United States, so what really suffered for me were my social skills. So my interpersonal skills are really bad, but because I wasn't obedient, my public speaking skills are really good. So that's why I'm here to do this today. So what I want you to do is to sit back and relax, and let's have an interactive session. I'm not a lecturer. I'm not going to do a lecture. I'm not going to lecture. So the first slide basically challenged you to see if you knew your lineage by name. Like, I don't, my parish is important too, like where did your people arrive from? So we'll go through, what are some of the things you need to do in order to document your family history. Who's advancing this night? I will. Okay. But I obviously can't do that. So, this is what you call a pedigree chart. This is what you would have filled out had I handed it to you this morning, but I didn't have to hand to you. So when you do family history, you always want to start with yourself and work backwards, right? Because you have most information about the people who are immediately in your presence. So it's you, your parents, these boxes here, and then their parents, and there are 2 boxes for each, and that's how we got to the 8 great-great-grandparents. Okay? So this is Bayesian Ancestry, and what I love about this, it's history, but it's not that stuffy, academic history where they lecture whether you're sleeping or not. It's like fun, because it's about you, okay? And it's about you discovering about you. So it's a lot more fun for me to do this than the other kind, which I love too, but. So today what we're gonna do an introduction. We'll talk about why would you bother to do this? We're going to talk about what are some of the challenges that you might face doing family history, some of the opportunities that you might have, and what are the sources of information, and then we'll wrap it up. And I'd like to have you, if you have a burning question, you can ask as I go along. So lately I've been thinking about why in Barbados particularly, there's some roadblocks when you do family history, and people say they are, but I haven't found any, probably because I'm disobedient. I press people, because obedience, I don't know. The old people did used to talk. I know he's family, but I can't tell you how back. It's only we's a small family. My great-grandmother, or my great-grandfather was white. I can't tell you how many times I hear that. So me, just address that. Henry Louis Gates, he's like a famous African-American historian. He has estimated through DNA that all of us, most of us, black people in North America, 24% European DNA. So yes, we all have it. And then, everybody in Barbados has somebody who went to Panama. Every household has somebody who went to Panama. And I've recently been working a lot with the Panama records, and I am just amazed. If you were a man 20 years old and you didn't go to Panama, the conversations in the villages were probably like, you ain't me? What the hell everybody else like, you ain't me? That's exactly what happened, because so many of us went to Panama. Okay, so why would you do this? Like for me, it started when I had my first child and I was living in the States and removed from my family that I grew up with. And it was like, kind of like, well, what am I going to tell him? Because I really don't know that much. And so I came home one year and I started talking to my grand and I said, okay, where we come from? She said, oh, but I got this cousin named Jack. Well, let me carry on there. She can tell you about your family. And that's how I got started. My husband then bought me a family history computer program and I started putting in the information, starting with myself and working backwards. So the computer program, write this down, that I like, is Family Tree Maker. Family Tree Maker, write it down. So if you're going to use software, that's the software we use. If you are not computer literate, their classes. And I would recommend, because everything now is on the computer. You almost can't get away from it, or you can ask like your son or your daughter or somebody in your household to help. Another reason why you can do this, I remember when I first started, I met a cousin from Japanese, and I was talking to her, and I said, I'm starting to do this family history thing. She said, wait, back in 1990-something, there was an article in the Nation, and these people was looking for Oltons, and so I wrote in, and they wrote me back, and turns out there was an estate in Alabama that the state had possession of, and it was now available because the man died intestate with no will, and there were no heirs. So this organization was looking in Barbados for the descendants of this man. And of course, since Olton was our last name, I'm thinking, all right, I'm on this. Right? Because maybe, just maybe, this man is connected to me. So there are other more tangible reasons to do it. And these are some of the letters that went back and forth with this company in Utah about the kid. By the time I got there, though, he said they had closed the file. They didn't find anybody. Okay, so there are like 6 steps you would take. 1, remember your ancestors. You definitely want to hang out with the elderly people and listen to them and write down what they say. It's not gibberish, them turning foolish. They're just sharing and passing down oral history, oral traditions. And we need to pay attention to that. Because then when they come to you, you're going to know what to tell the people. I went by a woman Saturday, and she said, my family are calling me, asking me questions, and I don't know. She said, I don't even know how I get a belly. She said, well, my mother is an Innes, how I get a belly, I know. So, people, because family history is so big in the diaspora, people are going to be calling you, asking you questions because you're here, and you want to be equipped yourself to know, or if you're out there, you're going to want to equip yourself so that when at lunch, all the people talking about, you see that show last night, who do you think you are? And you'll be like, yeah, but I don't know who I am. Right? So this is really, Ancestry.com, who holds most of the records that we search, is a $6 billion enterprise. That's how big family history research is right now. That company was offered $6 billion for all its records and its whole corporate portfolio. So then you're going to begin collecting oral histories, meaning talk to the old people. You're going to see if someone else has already done the information. You're going to look for photographs, and I'll talk about that then. And then you're going to search the records, and most of all, you're going to have fun. This is fun. Once you start, you don't stop. This is like putting pieces of a puzzle together. All right, are you with me? All right. Okay, so that's me and my grandmother, because I got to practice what I preach. She passed in 2010. Thank God we did this. Thank you. And don't just talk to your family members. Talk to your neighbors, because believe it or not, they know more about you sometimes than you know. Right? And sometimes in Barbados particularly, we have strange family relations. Because you can grow up in a village and not know that the house 2 doors down is your grandmother's first cousin. And I have seen that happen time and again, where you think, oh, Miss Roach, that's our family? Or they say, oh, that's your family. Well, how? Well, I ain't know. My mother tell me his family. So we're seeking to reach out to various people in the family and outside the family to piece the puzzle together. And people say that, oh, people don't talk. That is not true. You see, Miss Trotman was 108 when she died, and she tell it all. So I go to Miss Trotman, I'm here researching the Taitts. She said, the Taitts are good. So I go in, because this is going to be really good. We're getting a lot of juicy stories, and they do tell. So don't be afraid to approach the elderly and ask questions. Because the time they reach that age, they don't want to take it with them. They're happy to tell you. So oral tradition, this is Uncle Philip when I went to him, and I'm using my experience just to show, and just as a means of walking you through my experience, so then at the same time sharing the methodologies and tips that I used. This is Uncle Philip, advanced. So I went to him because he was in England for 30 years, but he was old enough where he might have known his great-grandmother or heard about her grandmother. So Uncle Philip, and so this is what he says to me. I asked him about his, go ahead, go back. Click on that. No, go back. No. I think you want to go forward 1, 2, click. No. Dolly's mother, do you remember Dolly's mother, your grandmother? Okay, so something like that, well, gee, he really didn't know very much. But in fact, as I was searching the records, who he was talking about was a woman who was born right at the cusp of emancipation. Her name was actually Hannah. And her nickname was probably Han, but he heard Han. This is why you write down everything, because at some point, that information is going to make sense. It may not make sense in isolation, but when you get all the pieces, you're like, oh, he means Hannah. And maybe they called her Anne or Han. No, the priest, when he wrote about Hannah, in one record she's Anne, in another she's Hannah, in another she's Anna, and another, so the priest would write, well, when you go to them, they would write down what they hear, not necessarily what your actual name is. So that's another thing you have to watch out for. Try multiple names when you're doing your searches, because the records will have variant spellings of the names, okay? Also, you want to make sure that you don't not go to certain people. We have a woman in our family, Olga, and you're growing up here, oh Lord, poor Olga dead. The father, she crossed her head with the shoe, last thing. And you would think, oh, well, I'm not going to go bother Olga, she's dead. Well, one day, because I'm disobedient, I went to Olga, right? And believe it or not, she said to me, hold on a minute, she went to the bedroom and came back with a box full of family history data that she had collected over the years, and told me to take it, because she was like 80-something. She's like, don't take it. I'm like, I don't want to take your stuff. But she lost her mom when she was young, and family was really important to her because of that, and I think she just documented everything. And so she was a treasure trove of information, even though she had a hearing impairment. So don't rule out anybody. You'd be surprised who is keeping your family history. And believe it or not, somebody in your family is already doing this. That's a video, but I'll skip it, but you will hear the hearing impairment, so she has a speech impediment because she doesn't hear well, but she just kept talking and sharing. And she was raised by her grandmother, who was born in 1852. So you can imagine the stories that she had to share, right? This is another family member that I met. Miss Rochester's still alive. She's 90-something, lives in Allen View, St. Thomas, and she's the local historian over there. And she's also a treasure trove of information. So you have to make the rounds, okay? But first you have to find out who the people are in your family. Now, Miss Rochester is interesting because, like I told you, her brother was the sexton at Holy Innocents for 45 years. She herself, she thinks of herself as a historian. So you go to her and she can't wait to tell you stuff. So that's a click, because that's a video.
Before people buy this property on the Sturgeon Festival, and who buy it, and who buy out from me, and who live everything. We don't the Owens, or keep the Owens, and therefore then that the buyer property here, down there on the steps there, the 6th of June in 1873 at the age of 88.
See, I told you, they tell everything. They tell everything. And the fact that she has that date in her head, that may have something to do with land and being land ownership, and so you're constantly in the wills and the deeds, and so you memorize it. But incredible, right? There are people in your family who have this kind of information that you need to carry on, or should keep for your records as well. So my presentation is very technology dependent. Yeah, it's very technology dependent. So bear with us.
Buy this property on the Sturgeon. Buy this property on the Sturgeon Festival.
Okay, another thing you want to do is check online. So my dad came down with prostate cancer around 2000, and I realized I was so focused on my mother's family, I didn't do anything with his. He's a T. And so I put the last name in on the internet in Google. I just put Taitt. And one of the sites that came up was a site that had the woman on the right. So I said, well, let me see what this is all about. And it turns out it was a family reunion that happened in the Poconos in Pennsylvania. And it was this Taitt family. So I did a little investigating, and when I contacted them, turns out that she is my father's great-great-aunt from the wife. Because he's from the outside woman. You understand? Right. Which is another reality of Beijing family history. Now, understand that we practiced polygamy for a lot of decades. Barbados was a polygamous society during enslavement and after. So this is not abnormal, it's pretty normal, and it was almost, pretty normal. So, unfortunately, her grandchildren in the Poconos had no idea that the grandfather had 5 children with the other women from the plantation. So I had to deliver that news. And she said, well, I need evidence. So I had to go looking for the evidence, and I did find one piece of evidence, but the evidence is in the features, right? It said family can't hide, right? So the Chinese eyes, that was a big giveaway. Anyway, that's me. Okay. So do you have any tips yet? Are you writing down the tips? Because you guys are doing an awful lot of laughing. I need you to write down the tips. Okay. So my grandmother took me down to see her cousin, Etta. She said knows the family real good. My grandmother's side of the family. And as they were talking, me and my uncle sitting down there was like, we don't know what's going on. It's my first time. And before we left, we noticed this picture here on the wall, which is kind of hard to see. So we were like, well, who is that? Because remember, we live in a house down behind the bridge in the poor is that, but we ain't got no pictures that look like that. So of course we were curious, who is that? So she said, oh, that is Uncle John. And then my grandmother began to tell me who Uncle John was, and she had all these stories about Uncle John. So he then became the impetus, because I told you that everybody wants to got white in the family? I used to be like that too. Wait, man, let me father. Because you're thinking advantage, right? It's not that you don't want to be black. You think I got the advantage now, right? So anyway, we found out that Uncle John was my grandmother's great uncle. And he looks like this because he had gone up to Canada to work in the coal mines in Nova Scotia in 1914. And a lot of Barbadians did that, by the way. Dominion Steel came down to send recruiters down to Barbados to bring men up to work during World War I. And so there were a lot of these guys were skilled. They weren't like laboring class. They were skilled tradesmen. And they actually have a community in Nova Scotia of West Indians who went up during that time. Once the war was over, though, they didn't really need them anymore. So he came back to Barbados. So even a picture can be like the impetus to start your research. You see an interesting picture, and you go, oh, who was that? And next thing you know, you're off and running. But Uncle John's wife came back to Barbados, my grandmother, when she was 9 years old, and visited. And my great-grandmother told her at 9 years, take Miss Olton down to see Jane Small down Melvin Hill. So at 9 years old, she's taking Miss Olton from Canada down to see Jane Small. And when they got there, Jane sent them on this long walk, and there were people, a long line of people at the door going in, and people coming up the back. When she got back home, her mother said, oh, I wonder went so long. And when she told her, she said, well, if I know she didn't sell it to the obvious woman, and they gonna let it go. Turns out Uncle John's son, who he had brought up to Canada, got sick, and he was sick for 6 months, and she came back home looking for comfort, which meant going to see the woman. Right? So these stories that you're hearing, these are stories my grandmother told me, but I was able to prove them in the records is my point. Because I have the little boy's death certificate, he died from TB, right? So these aren't stories that these old people are talking and you're going to talking foolish way to always telling you that they're passing on critical family history information in those stories. Does that make sense? Oh! I got so used to you doing it. Okay, pictures. We didn't have any pictures when we were growing up. We didn't have any pictures. We didn't have any pictures when we were growing up in my house, but when I started doing family history, I was amazed that other family members, extended family, had pictures. Because in every family you got the ones that get ahead, well, them is the one with the pictures. Or you got the ones that went way, them is the one with the pictures. So if you can connect with them, you end up with a nice collection of photographs. So this is my grandmother's Aunt Tina from Jackman. It was her daughter, Edna, that she took me to visit, and she's Uncle John's sister. But turns out there were 11 of them, and my great-great-grandmother was the oldest. And so she remained in St. Joseph, but the younger ones that were born and raised in Jackman's area. The one on the right, that's on my father's Taitt side. She's from the outside woman. I got a picture of one. She's from the outside woman that Mr. Taitt had over at Mount Acres. And it's her line that I come down through, right? And her granddaughter had this picture. She was born in 1884. The woman on the left was born in 1870. But you would argue that there are no pictures in your family. I challenge you, there are. You just gotta reach out. Now, I also didn't have a photograph of my Uncle Plummy. One day my cousin went to her mother's house and she called me. She goes, I have a picture of Uncle Plummy. He was the best man at my mother's wedding. This is 1947. So when I tell you check with the neighbors, they have stuff you need. So that's Uncle Plummy called out and he was the best man. On the left, that's Aunt Amelia Brooks. She was from Wetchmahal. And her grandkids have this picture. She was born in 1875. Or I'm going backwards. So that's my point with pictures. So let's move on. But there are other places that you can get family history. All these places here. And we're just going to run through them really quickly because I think I'm halfway through. Alright, so these are all the places you're going to look, so just run down that list in your head really quickly. So I've been having fun with this over 20 years I've been doing this. And it's addictive. You can check artwork, baptism records, books, burials. I don't want to read the slide, but these are all the places you can look. This is a piece of, now my Taitt family comes from Sandiford. They actually started at Foster Hall Plantation with an enslaved woman named Betsy Ann, and she had a daughter named Clarissa, and she had a son named Thomas Henry Taitt, the philanderer. So, when I go to Sandiford, I'm trying to get a sense for what was it like there during the time that my people lived there. Well, there's a piece of artwork at the Atlantis that I can look at, and I see there was a train there, and I see the bay where they all did their fishing. So you can visualize kind of the area and the environment in which that they came up. But the most, besides artwork, probably the records you're going to spend the most time with are baptisms, burials, and marriages. But remember to always start with yourself and work backwards. I would think that a lot of us in our house or somebody in our immediate family has records of your parents somewhere in the house. So I would start with those. And then your grandparents, I would go to like your aunts and uncles because they probably have records in the house. If they're not in the house, that's when you go to the registry. Because I think the next generation you probably find it at the registry, the Barbados registry. And when you go there, make sure you have as much information as possible because they do charge you, I think it's $5 a year for each year that you search. There's a small charge, but do as much searching through oral history, through pictures, checking with other family members, and stuff that you have, in your immediate family. I would start there before you start going to these other places. So baptism records are interesting if you're Afro-Barbadian, because for me and my mother and my grandmother and my great-grandmother, my great-great were good. But when you start going back further than that, there are no last names, so that can be a little bit of a challenge. And no last names because once you hit enslavement, or even immediately after enslavement, baptism records would not have last names because they didn't have last names when they were enslaved. But that's not a big deal because I've been able to get past that barrier, okay? Raise your hand if you knew that. We didn't have last names when we were enslaved. So everybody else didn't know? Oh good, so you learned something new, so this was worthwhile. And the reason why we didn't have last names is because we were being socialized to be slaves. And if you're being socialized to be a slave, there's no need to have a last name because your job you didn't have that, So this right here is one of my ancestors on the bottom, her name was Hannah. Is that what that is? You can't really see it because it's blurry. But you will notice there's a check mark in the last name column. That means that you are dealing with somebody who was born during the enslavement period. And it's not a big deal, but you know, it's a big deal, but you need to know that so that you're not shocked, because trust me, I was so shocked. I remember going and trying looking for this woman, Mercy. This is my first time at the archives after I talked to my grandmother, right? I run down to the archives because I'm like, oh my God, this is so cool. And I was looking for this woman named Mercy Ann. I found 200 Mercy Anns and none of them have a last name, and I was like, what? What am I supposed to do now? You know? Luckily for me, it was the wrong person that I was looking for anyway. But just be prepared for things like that. Because, you know, for most of us over 50, we weren't really taught about us. I mean, in school, you learn about everybody else, the Germans, the Jews, the French, the Spanish, the British, but a lot of us did not learn about us, so this is like really eye-opening sometimes. This is what a slave baptism looked like at Rock Spring Plantation, which is my ancestral plantation on my grandmother's side. So once slavery was coming to a close, the Anglican Church decided that maybe it was time to baptize us and get us into the Christian way, because remember, we were not really Christianized, you know. That came after slavery was diminishing. So they decided we had to be Christianized, and so you started seeing us getting baptized in large numbers in the Anglican books. I am telling you that we went to the church and they sprinkled us. I think they just probably came out to the plantation and wrote down all the names and said, oh, okay, when I'm done. Because it's hard to read the top of that, but it says slaves baptized in the parish of St. Thomas. For the white baptisms, it would say whites baptized in the parish church of St. Thomas. In these early years, there's definitely a difference between the two. Books are cool, like this book. I love this book by Barbados, and Watson Yates wrote this. She's passed now. And funny enough, she grew up at one of the ancestral plantations that I came through, which is Bushy Park in St. Thomas. Yes, there's a Bushy Park in St. Thomas. And she wrote this book, and in the book, she has a picture of the plantation where my ancestors worked and lived. So books are cool. You can piece it together using books. Churches, Holy Innocents is where most of my records came from, and you will find the same thing. You don't have to look very far for your ancestors, you know. Just figure out the plantation and the corresponding church, and there you have it. Because when slavery ended, we went away. You know what? They said, okay, you're free. And you're like, yeah, I'm free. But all the land was owned by other people, so we're going. Right? So it was very difficult for us then to move, except if we went to Guyana or did some kind of migration. So most of our family records are at the church where your ancestors would have gone for their vital statistics. So most of mine are either Holy Innocents on my mom's side, and it's St. Joseph Parish Church and St. Anne's on my dad's side. Because in order to leave the plantation, you would have to have some land to go at. Got no land. Land belongs to them. Right? So this is why I say it's not very hard to go back at least to 1860 here about. So this is where I go. Now the headstone here, that's some of my relatives right there when you go in the front church. Even though you went in the other day, you stoned out somebody and stoned it. I know what you're doing. Burial records, same thing. You know, wherever they were baptized, chances are that's where the burial records are going to be. So you just stick with that same church for the most part. So this is one of my ancestors there. She lived to be 80, which means she was a very resilient young woman. And I found that in the same church. All right. That marriage records are key because marriage records have parents' names on them. Okay? So if when you're going backwards, find a marriage record, and it should have like the name of the father, occupation, and where they lived. So I love marriage records. Some of the later burial records have that information as well. But I don't want to move from there because I think the vital records A lot of you have them in your home, right? You go down to the registry and you get them, but mostly you only get them if you want to fight over a piece of land. I know how it works. So now you're going to be going to get them because you want to document your family history. And you want to definitely be paying attention to all the anomalies you're going to find. Okay? But they're not barriers. Don't stop just because you don't see a last name. Or because you don't find a marriage. By the way, in Barbados, most of us, if you're first or second born, you're born out of wedlock. Just accept it. It's not a problem. Because it only became a problem because the same church that didn't allow you to be Christianized, when slavery ended, we're holding you to Christian values and telling you that you are lawful. Really? Of course I'm lawful. For 200 years I couldn't marry, remember? And so there are a lot of older people who have shame because, well, my mother died and the boy didn't want she did a bastard. Somebody told me that. But why would we have shame if in fact the church didn't Christianize us and are now holding us by Christian standards? So the majority of babies in Barbados in the 1800s were born out of wedlock. As a matter of fact, there were more born out of wedlock than in wedlock. And that tradition remains, but it remains because the established state did not permit us to marry. Enslaved people could not legally have families. Whether you were here or in the US, you could not legally have a family. A black man did not own his family. So white men coming out of slavery, would they try to make us have shame because we ain't living by Christian values? So we need to debunk all that stuff and just go ahead and research our family. Yes, you're going to find stuff, but you have to put that stuff in the context. Okay? So there's no shame in the game. Am I helping anybody? Oh. Census records. Now we're moving on from those census records. I live in the United States. And my Aunt Daisy, my grandmother's oldest sister, migrated to New York in 1924. And that's how I was able to find a lot of information. And you may need to go to the US Census records to find information about your ancestors because we are a migrant population and everybody has somebody in the family or extended family who went away. And when you go away, you create a travel record. A lot of our information is found in these travel records. And I have some here, so at the end, if you want to take a look at them, I meant to pass them out at the beginning. But these are Ellis Island records, because if we went to New York, we went through Ellis Island. If we went to Florida, you know, the Florida records. And these records give you information about people that were left behind. So when Aunt Daisy went away, one of the columns on the travel manifest was, who did you leave behind in Barbados? And that really helps us in the diaspora, particularly if your family went away in the 20s and you lost kind of connection with the people in Barbados. You want to look at those Ellis Island records first. Because if you come back here and go to the archives, you say, well, my grandfather Andrew went away in 1920 and I'm here to find his record. And they're going to give you a book with about 50 million Andrews. And you're going to know which one unless you go to the Ellis Island record and see who they left behind. And then that will put you in the right direction. Okay. So census records are done every 10 years in the United States. For black people, they didn't start till 1870 after slavery ended. So if you're African American, forget it. You're not going to go back much further than 1870. We in the Caribbean, the British Caribbean, are completely fortunate because our records were done by the church, the state. And so our records go way back as black people. We can go way further back than African Americans in the States. People come from all over the world, by the way, to look at our records. Am I right? You go down to the archives, you look in the book, people are coming from scholars, diaspora, everybody comes to look at your records. That's how important they are. And so these US records have our people migrating into the States, and migrating into Canada, migrating into Florida, and everywhere else. So you definitely want to think of those as a resource. Now, you may not think it, but all of us had somebody that worked on a plantation. I did too, except that my family, we were in management. We've been in management a long time, you know, superintendents and drivers and that sort of thing, yeah. I found a lot of them. But sometimes there are court cases that are brought against the plantation. And if you go into archives sometimes and look through some of the court cases, you just might find some of your people, right? So this is my ancestor, James Freeman Brooks. He got a loan for £1.60. But you would never think to look there, right? You think, oh, baptism, burial, death. No, you can find information on your family in a lot of really interesting places. So this is Freeman Brooks. He was actually an artisan. I do have to admit, like, I came up through as you look, right? You might start out with like a slave female, but if she's good looking, she'll get an artisan and then you move up. You know what I mean? So I think that happened to James Freeman. He was an artisan. He was a millwright at Disapora. And so you know when you're a millwright, all the women, you know, yeah, if you don't notice them, they might get vexed, so you have to do what you have to do. Wills are another place to look. I was looking for Arthur Taitt, and I found him in Oscar Tait's will. He signed the will. So the lady who was looking for evidence, the one in the Poconos, that I told her that her grandfather had an outside woman, and that I'm descended from that woman, and she wanted evidence. Look, you see? That's it right there. The wife, grandson, and him in a will together. So this is odd right here, but I'll place this back to marriage records. This is two people coming out of enslavement. 1838, slavery ended. 1839, everybody that wanted to got married, Trey got married. So this is Mary Bella and Lewis, my ancestors. They got baptized before they got married, and then shortly after they got married. So it's not like people weren't trying to comply, right? They wanted to be married. It's just that prior to slavery, they weren't legally allowed to be married. And even if they let you get married, the next day they could say, it off. Slavery was horrible. Okay. That's not a marriage record. Another place you can look is plantation inventories. Every plantation did an inventory. Not all the inventories survived. But if you, let's say you transferred your plantation to somebody else, the court is going to require the estate packet is going to having a listing of everything you own on that plantation, right? Well, don't you own some enslaved black people? Well, you have to make a list of them as well. So this is a picture of a slave inventory, and in that inventory it will show how much your ancestor was worth on the slave market at the time. So this is a picture of one of my ancestors who was on that list. Two of them, Lewis and Mary Bella, the same two people I just showed you that got married, they were enslaved at Rock Spring. So this is an inventory of showing them and their how much they were worth at the time they were enslaved. Every plantation also did a slave register, because when slavery ended, if you owned a plantation, you had to report to England if you got any new slaves, because they wanted to know where you get them from, because slavery ended. You're not supposed to be purchasing any slaves from Africa. So you had to submit a listing of all your enslaved people every 3 years, from 1816 to 1834. And that's a really good span of time where you can see the growth of your ancestors. And I believe most of us can get back here. That's been my experience. So this is Rock Spring as it looks today, the main house. And I went there, and there's this beautiful young boy on the lawn. I think he's the doctor's son. So go and visit. After all, your people weren't there so many decades. I would go and visit. Check it out. Check out the place. You walk around and feel the spirit. That's what I do. I visit graveyards. I visit plantation homes. With permission, of course. But it's all part of the experience. It's not, you're a researcher, you're digging. Okay. Time check, please.
Two questions I have. First question. I have a number of my family records. My son is not interested in it. But where should I take the information so that it is there for public scrutiny? Because I can't pass it down to a generation that really don't give a damn. Secondly, if these records are so important, I am the Director of Emergency Services here in Barbados, and I want to ensure that there are emergency plans to safeguard this data.
The first question about, with mine, I have it and I have shared it with my family members, first and foremost. You do all that work, you make sure those pictures and stuff you have the electronic age, digitally. I would share that stuff within your family, whether they want it or not. And there are ways to do that on Facebook and, other family websites. And there are other repositories like the Barbados Archives, the Barbados Museum. They would all love to have a copy so that other people coming in who maybe, in your family would have access to that information. And I'll let these guys answer the question about preservation and emergency management.
Thank you. To the questioner, I believe I heard you ask where you would deposit records that you consider to be of historical importance. Well, the Department of Archives is a place for that. You can just give us a call, or perhaps you can come in and talk to us, let us know what the records are, and we will advise you accordingly. It's the mandate of the archives to preserve records that are of legal, cultural, and historical value in a national sense. So you can talk to us. Are there other questions?
Buenos días. Mi nombre es Ana Deborah Lloyd.
Good morning, my name is Ana Deborah Lloyd.
Vengo de Cuba.
She's from Cuba.
Quisiera encontrar mis abuelos, la familia.
She knows that she has family here. She would like to find them.
Lloyd, el nombre de mi abuelo.
My grandfather's name.
Arnoldo Etelbert Lloyd.
Arnold Ethelbert Lloyd.
De mi abuela.
And her grandmother.
Carneta Gertrudis Osborne.
Carneta Gertrudis Osborne.
Mi abuelo se bautizó.
She has the baptismal paper.
En la iglesia de San José.
St. Joseph's Church. Her grandfather was baptized in St. Joseph's Church.
A mi abuela.
Her grandmother.
San George.
St. George. St. Andrew, she said.
Ok, te puedo ayudar porque yo soy de St. Joseph. Y el señor Lloyd de Melrose Plantation. So, tú puedes hablar conmigo y también tú puedes visitar a la oficina de ellos, el archivo, y te puedo ayudar.
She said her father was a Barbadian and her parents were Barbadian.
Bienvenidos a Barbados.
She's the only person from Cuba this time.
¿Entiendes?
Just to make a brief reply to the last question, I don't believe I heard any dates mentioned. Were any dates mentioned? Oh. Well, if there are any dates, if she can find out any dates, she said her baptism records, if there are any dates of baptisms, years actually, then perhaps we at the archives might be able to help, depending on what those years are. So that's crucial.
Te lo explique.
She has her father's birth certificate. has it here. And then it shows her grandparents' name on there. And her great-grand. She has the documents here, so I suppose I'll get it to Sandra.
Yes, perhaps we can look at those documents afterwards and maybe you can advise her.
Okay. She'll be here until the 25th.
Maybe she can visit the archives as well.
Okay. Gracias.
De nada.
I believe there's none. Thank you, I believe there's none.
Good morning. My name is Robert Mead. I'm trying to trace my grandfather. He's from St. Michael, Barbados, born the 26th of October, 1885. My grandmother is Miriam Cadogan, and she married my grandfather, Richard Mason. I do not have no information, just that. I'm from Panama. I'm leaving on Saturday.
If I may reply to that one, 1885, we have baptism records for that year in the archives. So again, you will need to come to the archives and we will show you how to do a search.
Thank you.
Yes. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll get with you before you leave here.
Thank you.
Don't forget, there's a Panama session at 1:45. Are you going to be there?
Yes, sir.
Definitely.
Let me just add, any of you who have similar queries and you have names, approximate dates of birth, death, or marriage, you can just perhaps give us a call at the archives, or if you have time within your busy schedules to visit the archives, we might be able to help you.
And just in addition to that, we do have the session at 1:45, which is going to focus on Panama. Like I said, everybody has a Panama, somebody in the family. So during lunch, I want you to get the name of that person in your family from Panama and make sure you come back. I do have a listing of some of the people who went to Panama, I think 1906, 1907, by parish and then by village. So I'd love to share that with you, so make sure you come back for that session. You have a question?
Yes, good morning. My name is Peggy Harewood. And my
Say Harewood.
Harewood. H-A-R, Harewood. And my family, on my dad's side, was from St. Philip. Unfortunately, the parish church burned down some years ago. My question is there an alternate source where we can find that information?
Once again, depending on the years involved, you can come to the archives. If the information, if the dates go up to 1903, let me say 1903 and below, before that, then certainly we at the archive should have all of the baptism, marriage, and burial records. After that period, you may have to go to the registration office depending on the years. But the fact that the church was burned, St. Philip, I remember when that was done, I don't think that was affecting the older records as such, because we would already have had the originals in the archives, as well as the copies from the registry.
Okay, very good. So here, blanket statement. The Barbados Archives is a repository. The churches deposit records there after certain times, so if you don't find it at the church, you find it in the archives. There are also tremendous resources on the internet, online, and we'll talk about that in just a few minutes.
I have a question on behalf of someone who has been following the Barbados-Carolina connection. Her family lives in New York, and they hail from Charleston, South Carolina. The young lady wanted to find out whether there was an orphanage in Bridgetown, because as she has been doing her research, she found out that she's connected to a family by the name of Blygen and Mitchell. And some of the information she got said that her mother's people came from an orphanage in Barbados. They left Barbados and went to New York. Is there records relative to this orphanage, or where would you find that? sometime in the 1940s?
Well, we use the term orphanage, but there are a number of children's homes in Barbados, like close to Bridgetown, for example, would be the Nightingale's home, and then there are others, run by governments scattered throughout the country. That is really something that we cannot go, advise you in detail on now. Well, you would need to know the children's home, the name of the particular children's home involved. And that will require some in-depth research. So I would suggest once again that you contact us at the archives and give us all the information, and we will see how far we can help you, or if there are other government agencies that you may need to contact.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, well thank you for all those wonderful questions, and we're going to try to move along. I think we got 15 minutes. If you have questions though, are you going to be in that afternoon session? And also, we have a booth out here that's going to be manned in between these sessions, so make sure you come up and visit. All right, so remember I said we didn't have last names? So where did the last names come from? Like, how did John William, who was baptized John William, the enslaved little mulatto boy, where did he get his last name? We don't know. I have no idea where he pulled it from. I mean, it could be overseer, it could be manager, it could be he mother, last owner. I mean, like, we really don't have anything definitive. So we have to kind of draw some educated conclusions about where they came from. So in this case, John William, this enslaved baby, he got him baptized in 1830 on the 10th of January. I think they set aside that for us. Isn't that nice? The 10th of January shows up a lot. Like, that was our day to go. And John William, the baby, is being baptized in 1830. Mind you, he's still an enslaved person. Children got freed in 1834 if you were under the age of 6. And you notice he put a name in there. And he found a name in there. The owner's name is there. He belonged to a man named Thomas Walk and his wife. So it's Walk Springs plantation. But look up above. There is a daughter named Catherine being baptized the same year in the parish church of St. Thomas. And notice he's not on the fancy form. So her father is also at Walk Spring. And his name is Thomas Olton. And he's the overseer, and he owns a little spot called Pleasantville, not far away. So I'm like, where did John Olton get this name? My ancestor right near Olton. Where did he get this name from? Because he got married, and all of a sudden, no, instead of John William, the enslaved boy, he named John William Olton. So when I saw this record here, I said, I should have known the overseer. He was mulatto. He was a mixed child. So who you think he belonged to? The overseer. So naturally, when he got married and he needed to take a last name, he took that man's name. So that's the first time I know of that we have a last name in our family. No, actually, his wife's parents took the Ward name. No, and that's another thing. I hear people running around talking about, oh, the Wards took care of their, I want to know. They took care of stuff. Because I have an ancestor named Ward and I didn't get nothing. No, I think. But where did he get that name from? We have no idea. It could be that, there was, if you look at some of the deeds, if you look at the Walk Spring deed, it will usually tell you what properties are but and bound to that plantation, and that's another thing to look for, right? And so next to Walk Spring, there is a landowner named Ward. Well, could it be that his mother used to belong to this man, so that he decided to... We don't know. Historians cannot tell you definitively where these last names came from, but we did take last names. So John William took Mr. Olton's name. So, like I told you, my family's been in management a long time. Another place that you can look, other plantation data, there are historians that go into the archives and other libraries, and they take notes, and they leave those notes behind for you, so that when you come behind, you have an easier time. This is the Carey papers that I got information. That Mr. Olton, he owned Pleasantville Plantation where my great-grandmother was born, and then it belonged to the Dashes. So by the time my grandmother came along, it was called Dash Yard. She had no idea that her mother was baptized at that plantation because her mother's grandfather belonged to the overseer. So, you know, you're just kind of piecing it all together as you go along. It's kind of fun. Another document, plantation records. There are a few of them at the museum. They have like 6 books. I believe the archives may have some plantation ledgers. And I believe I come from a disobedient line of people, you know. Because would you believe that I found in the Wall Spring ledger of 1850 something that one of my ancestors got a warrant for trespassing? His name they make Lewis Ward Warren trespass. Because you know when you leave the plantation, you can't go back. If the watchman catch you, you might get charged. So he got charged. And his wife, Mary Bella, she appears in the plantation ledger book as well. She was selling cane fodder to the plantation.
Excuse me, 5 more minutes, Sandra.
Thank you. I'll be obedient. So there's some places that you wouldn't think to look, but your family's names may show up. Again, that's a slave register showing the value of the enslaved person. And I notice I say enslaved person because my ancestors were not slaves. They were people. However, they were enslaved by other people. And those other people call them slaves, but to me, they were my family who were enslaved. You understand? All right. Okay, so all of us have a story. Somebody went to Panama, this one went to Guyana, somebody went to Trinidad, somebody went to Demerara, somebody went to Boer War, somebody went where... Every Bayesian family got stories about somebody who went somewhere, am I right? Somebody went to America, somebody went to England. We are just a land of migrant folk, and so we have to spend a lot of time with travel records. This is ellisislandrecords.org right now. ellisislandrecords.org. If you come to the booth, I'll try to have this afternoon a list of these websites for you, because there are a lot of online sources that you can use to supplement your visits in between the archive visits. So if you went to New York, like my Aunt Daisy did, she's on line 10, you can't see it, I'm sorry. She filled out this record. She left here. She was a domestic servant working for Miss Noel, the white woman in Sugar Hill. And she spoke English. It says she was a British subject, which in 1924 she would have been. But here's where I got shocked, right? It says she's African. Raise your hand if you consider yourself African. 2 people. I figured, you know, if you went to New York in 1924, you were British subject, but you were listed as African on the travel record. So for all of you people who say we're not African, all right. But next to that is where they have who she left behind, and that's where my great-grandmother's name is. She left my great-grandmother behind in Sugar Hill. She also used she was born out of wedlock, but she used her name as if she wasn't. So I think she might have had a little shame. So when I went to the daughter and said, you know your mother's name is Bolton? My mother ain't named no Miss Bolton, my mother was a Brooks. All right, well, ask my grandmother. But these records are really valuable. Let me tell you about the African thing. When the Bajans left here in the early 1900s, it went everywhere. When they went to the United States, they were not considered West Indian. West Indian was reserved for whites coming from the Caribbean. If you were black, no. If you had any admixture is the right language. Any admixture of the blood of the Negro, the immigration man had to put down that you were African. So in the States, we had the one-drop rule. In Barbados, you just needed 1 drop too. 1 drop and you're fat like you were somebody. The other way. But in the States, we had the 1 drop rule. So 1 drop of black blood and you had to be listed as African. This shocked me a little bit. Because you know when we leave Barbados, we're more Bayesian than ever, right? I'm West Indian, I'm Canadian. So I imagine they had a really hard time with that. I imagine that when you left here, you had a really hard time adapting to that kind of thing. This is Aunt Daisy. She's the one who was listed as British African. I'm sure that pissed her off because she probably thought she was, you know, something. I met her later. She really would stop me. And of course, we had people going to Panama. We'll deal with that this afternoon.
Could you wind up this quickly, Sandra? I think your time is just about up.
Okay, so winding up. Family history research is a lot of fun, as you can see, and it sends you to places. I've visited places I probably wouldn't have visited if I wasn't doing this. It forces you to talk to people you haven't talked to in years. It helps you to mend broken family relations, because your grandmother didn't speak into this one and you call up and go, hi! It really helps us to recover lost family history because of the fact that we were enslaved and not documented as well as others. We have an opportunity now to take those records and piece everything back together. If we do that, then there's more pressure for our governments to invest money in preservation of our records. But if we're not using the records, they have no incentive whatsoever to invest money in preservation, to hire staff, to make sure that the archives have Wi-Fi available to patrons and that sort of thing. So we need you to participate, we need you to utilize the records like everybody else is doing around the world. The Mormons have all of our records, a ton of them are online, and we need to use them. Why would you do this? Any number of reasons. But I do it because I believe that I am here because somebody paid that price. And we write history about everybody else. And if we're not doing our history, who's going to do it for us? If we're not telling our stories, who's going to tell it for us? I've gone to places where they say to me, oh no, we're not going to put him in the book. I was like, well, why not? Because he's black. I've gone to places where I have gotten records in a town where the majority of the people are black. And they sold me a census book with not one black person in it. And I took it back and I said, well, there are no black people there. And the town is like mostly black. And she said to me, if the black people want to do their history, they have to do it themselves. So if we are not doing our history, we can't expect anyone else to. And nobody can tell our stories better than we can. And we are the survivors. This is soapbox. We are the survivors, right? You were here because somebody decided that in spite of it all, they're going to live. And I look back at slavery and I go, you know what? It was horrible, but it brought out so much strength and character. To have survived it, you all come from very strong people who deserve to be recognized and who deserve to be written about. So that's the impetus for why I do what I do. BNC for inviting me here, the Barbados Foreign Trade, Office of Foreign Trade for inviting me here, for the archives for agreeing to work with me, and I am available to answer any questions you have. If you want to get started, you need help, my business card is out there. I don't have a business, but I like to help people with it, and if you get value from it, I suppose you would give me a little something for it. But thank you.